This morning, we're hearing from George Zimmerman, the man acquitted in Trayvon Martin's death. In the 7 months since the jury returned the not guilty verdict in his murder trial, the public has seen little of Zimmerman, aside from his various scrapes with the law. Now, 2 years after shooting the unarmed teenager, he describes his life as a lightning rod for criticism and death threats. Chris Cuomo of CNN's New Day sat down for an extensive one-on-one interview with Zimmerman. Tell us about it, Chris.
Well, Carol, there are two main reasons to interview George Zimmerman. The first is because there are so many questions that remain about his case, and we got to ask him about all of them, and people can judge their answers for themselves. And the second is that there's so many big issues that reverberated out of that case that we see again echoed in the Michael Dunn case, questions for society, that George Zimmerman is often given a lot of credit of being a calculating zealot who knew how to work the system and understands these laws. So we asked him about them so that people could see if that's what he is, or is he really something less.
Do you regret that you killed Trayvon Martin?
It's a simple question, but one George Zimmerman can't seem to answer.
Unfortunately, the Department of Justice is conducting a civil rights investigation. So those are the types of questions that, because of the investigation, I have to tread lightly and I can't answer them.
We checked, and the Department of Justice is investigating any civil rights violations, but says charges aren't expected. Still, Zimmerman's reluctance seems to be about more than legalities.
Do you regret that night? Do you have regrets about it?
Certainly, I think about that night, and I think my life would be tremendously easier if I had stayed home.
If you could go back, you would have stayed home that night?
Certainly, yes. In hindsight, absolutely.
And now, as a point of clarification, you said, my life would be so much easier. When you say, I wish I had stayed home that night, are you thinking about you and also Trayvon Martin?
Certainly, I think about them, him. I think about my family, all the families that have been put in any type of dangerous situation. So yes, I think about everybody involved.
But safe to say, if you could change how that night came out, you would both be alive today?
I think that's just a different way of rephrasing it.
If you could go back and do it again, you had said you would have stayed home that night.
I would stay home.
So that both of you would still be alive today?
That's a presumption I can't make. I don't know what would have happened. I could have gotten in a car accident when I left, you know.
But you wouldn't have wound up killing Trayvon Martin if you had your way.
He probably wouldn't have ended up attacking me either if I would have stayed home. I know.
His family. Do you think about his family? Is that true?
Certainly, yes.
Because people want to know that, right? Coming out of this situation, they haven't heard you say, I feel for his family.
I appreciate the opportunity. I would hope that they had seen that at the bond hearing. I did address that.
It's different in court.
Oh, sure, but I was just simply stating that I did address it. It's because another misconception is that I've never apologized. I've never reached out to the family. Would I like to? Certainly.
What would you say?
You know, I would say exactly what I said on the stand, that I'm sorry for their loss. And just exactly what I said on the stand, most likely.
Thoughts about the victim, Trayvon Martin? The victim was Trayvon Martin, you know that?
No, I certainly was a victim when I was having my head bashed into the concrete and my nose broken and beaten, so I wouldn't say I was not a victim.
Of this, Zimmerman is sure, despite the public outrage painting him as a racist and the strong case by a prosecution calling him a murderer.
What do you want to say to people who believe that you went out that night as a vigilante, looking for trouble, and found it and bailed yourself out?
I don't focus on them. I deal with their hatred by loving my supporters more.
When people would reach out to you for the wrong reasons, who were supportive of you for the wrong reasons,
yes,
you know, because they liked that a young black man had been killed, how did that make you feel, that they saw you somehow symbolically as representing them?
Equally as disgusted with them as I was with people that were threatening my family and saying negative things about me.
Sitting through all of it, listening to the evidence and everybody's different take on you and your actions and your reactions and why, did it make you doubt yourself?
No.
Why not?
Faith. I know.
In yourself or in God?
No, God. I know that ultimately He's the only judge that I have to answer to. He knows what happened. I know what happened. So I leave it up to Him.
A faith that keeps him in Florida, despite a number of threats on his life.
Did people around you say, George, you got to go?
I'll never leave this country, and I'll leave my home when I want to leave my home. I know it sounds stubborn and maybe ideological, but I'll move when I want to.
The word haunted often comes up in these situations. Do you find yourself haunted by memories of that night?
No.
Because?
I don't know.
George Zimmerman is not haunted by taking a man's life. Perhaps more surprising, Zimmerman thought his life would stay the same.
The feeling was that people will accept this. You know, I'm going to go through the trial. It is what it is. The outcome will be accepted, and then I move on. That's what you thought would happen?
I was hoping for that, yes.
And when did you realize you weren't going to get what you hoped for?
I think it was the first speeding ticket when that made international news. It was shocking to me.
Of course, there'd be a lot more than speeding tickets, right, Carol? But I mean, there are two main takeaways for us and why we thought this was relevant. The first is the silence that you hear when I ask him about what he wanted to say to the family and how reluctant he is to say that he wished he had not killed Trayvon Martin. The reason for that is he believes he was a victim and what he did was right. And that's why he's stuck. That's why he's not haunted. That's why he doesn't have any doubts. And then the bigger question becomes, Carol, well, why make this man relevant? He is relevant. And I think just as important as his being relevant is why. People assume he's this calculating manipulator of the system. I ask him about stand your ground. He says he doesn't want to be the face of it. I ask him about self-defense. He says he doesn't understand it. I ask him about the Dunn trial. He says he hasn't watched a frame. I believe people have falsely empowered this man. I think he's relevant for a very different reason. He is an example of what happens when you have someone who's relatively unsophisticated, who makes a series of bad decisions and gets bailed out by a law, the Florida self-defense statute, forget about stand your ground, that makes it too easy for someone to get away with murder. It doesn't punish stupid the way the law should, Carol. And as a result, you're going to have verdicts where juries are tested, and you're going to see that even a good jury like in Michael Dunn can't come out to the right situation because of the law. And also because of a lot of other prejudices and culture issues that we have to deal with outside the courtroom.
Right. Well, in my mind, he's clearly troubled. He hasn't been able to find a job, and he's been getting into these scrapes with the law, you know, accused of domestic violence. And you know, he's traveling high rates of speed when he knows he's going to be stopped by police, and that, you know, the spotlight will shine ever brightly on him. He seems troubled to me. Did he seem that way to you?
Oh, absolutely. He's got to wear a bulletproof vest. He's got people making death threats. He's got lots of security. He can't go anywhere. He can't really be with his family. And there are a lot of people who will hear that and say, but he has his life, but he's not in jail where he may have well been if he was in any other state for the rest of his life. So it's about the balance of it. And certainly being at the center of such a huge trial makes him very relevant. The question is why? It's not about ignoring him. It's about examining him the right way, because this is a discussion, Carol, you've been great with it, but we have to keep having this discussion about how we treat violence in the country, how we punish it, because we're going to see bad decisions here. As a culture, it's got to change.
Well, we're going to talk more about it in the next hour of Newsroom, too.
Great.
Chris Cuomo, many thanks to you. This morning, we're hearing from George Zimmerman, the man acquitted in Trayvon Martin's death. In the 7 months since the jury returned the not guilty verdict in the murder trial, the public has seen little of Zimmerman, aside from his various scrapes with the law. Now, 2 years after the shooting, Two years after shooting the unarmed teenager, Zimmerman describes his life as a lightning rod for criticism and death threats. He sat down for an extensive one-on-one interview with Chris Cuomo of CNN's New Day.
As long as you don't have any warrants, we cut late the warning, okay?
It was a simple speeding ticket, but nothing is simple when George Zimmerman is involved. It would be the first in a string of run-ins with police that some saw coming.
That expectation that it's just a matter of time. He'll do it again. He'll do it again. This is what he's about. What do you make of that kind of?
Don't pay it any mind. Don't pay it any attention at all.
Get on your knees!
Next, Zimmerman's wife called 911 claiming he was threatening her and her father with a gun. There were no charges. Their divorce is pending. Then Zimmerman's girlfriend accusing him of threatening her with a shotgun. This time, Zimmerman would call 911 to get his side of the story out.
So why are you calling? What happened?
I
want everyone to know the truth.
His girlfriend would later drop the charges and lift a restraining order against him. During our interview, she and her young daughter wouldn't leave his side. And neither will controversy, thanks in part to his new hobby.
I've read what you put out there about the paintings. It says therapy, it's helping me, but you had to know they were going to cause attention when you put them out there, right?
Absolutely.
What did you want that attention to be about? Why are you putting the paintings out?
To be honest, I was hoping to be able to provide a decent lifestyle for my family.
Decent indeed. Zimmerman's first painting sold for more than $100,000. But the next painting was priceless for a different reason.
Angela Corey painting. Provocative. I have this much belief in the justice system. You knew that was going to be provocative.
Yes.
Why do it?
It was a creative, tangible form to show my inner thoughts, my inner feelings.
Negative towards Angela Corey.
Oh, of course. I mean, it provided a tremendous release for me. So yes, it was worth it.
And then there was the fight. A move as confusing as it was disturbing. The man whose defense at trial was an inability to hold off a teenager was now a prize fighter, willing to take on all comers for charity.
The idea of you fighting, is just, the image is bad. And let alone that, might be like a black rapper like DMX or something. I mean, just the racial overtones of it, were so horrible. What were you thinking there?
When I signed on, it was never going to be a black rapper, white rapper, Asian, Hispanic rapper, anything like that. It was going to be an unknown person. It was going to be a smaller event.
The whole theory of this case is that Trayvon wound up beating this guy down, and this was bad, and he had the marks on the back of his head, but now he wants to fight. He's a fighter, Do you understand how there was a contradiction there for people?
Yes, and again, that fraction of people that said that are the small percentage that don't realize that a boxing match with a referee in controlled conditions are significantly different than being mounted and, as the witness stated, ground and pounded. If I went out there and I got beat up, the charity was still getting paid. I don't want to get beat up, but I saw it as an opportunity. I never expected it to turn out the way it did.
George Zimmerman seems to feel that way about a lot of things. For example, becoming the face of white-black tensions in America.
I actually had 2 full Peruvians raising me and 1 American, so I felt almost like 2/3 of my upbringing was that Peruvian. I have black people in my family, so it was very shocking to me that simply based off my last name, people would make that presumption.
Though he's at the center of a debate about self-defense laws, he has little to say about them.
Because of what you've gone through and what your case was about, do you have feelings about self-defense and where the line should be and what's right and what's wrong? Do you have thoughts about that?
I am not well-versed enough to tell you. And I feel until I sit down, I study the Constitution and probably 10 years worth of legal findings, I wouldn't be able to draw a solidified conclusion, and I don't want to do what others have done to me and speak without examining information and facts. I do, however, support our Second Amendment right.
You might think Zimmerman would be riveted to the Michael Dunn trial, given its comparisons to his own situation.
I guess I should have prefaced this interview by letting you know that I don't watch news anymore. I watch comedy shows, home improvement shows. So I'm not well enough informed to give you exacts.
How about advocating for the Stand Your Ground laws that many identify with him?
Are you comfortable being the face of Stand Your Ground?
I'm not comfortable being the face of anything, to be honest with you.
It's what Zimmerman wants to be the face of going forward that may be the most confounding. Justice.
What do you want to do with your life?
Good. I'd like to professionally continue my education and hopefully become an attorney. I think that's the best way to stop the miscarriage of justice that happened to me from happening to somebody else. I don't think it should happen to anyone ever again, not one person.
What was the miscarriage of justice?
The fact that 2 law enforcement entities stated that I had acted within the laws of our nation in self-defense.
You don't think it was about the law?
I know it wasn't, I guess.
And what does that make you?
Like a scapegoat.
a scapegoat for?
The government, the president, the attorney general.
They would be scapegoating you, why? Just to show that they're taking a position on something that matters to a lot of people?
I don't know what they're thinking or why they're thinking it. All I know is that they're doing it. I don't know what agenda they have.
The case is over, but the judgment continues. While George Zimmerman may have won his freedom, he will probably never be truly free.
I have a lot of people saying that, you know, they guarantee that they're going to kill me and I'll never be a free man. I realize that they don't know me. I've learned that the majority of people, when they sit down with me one-on-one or with my family and I, they get a completely different perspective on me.
When you're somewhere and people recognize who you are and they're looking at you, what do you do?
Smile.
How often do they smile back?
99% of the time. The 1% that don't are the most vocal percent. Definitely the most threatening percent, because they are very vocal about their displeasure. So.
People are angry, George. They're angry. The case wound up being seen as a metaphor for miscarriage of justice, blacks not receiving the same justice that whites do, their lives not mattering as much. This case became a metaphor, an example from that. Your face became the face of, this is the guy who gets away with killing a black kid. What do you do with that?
I hope that I'm dispelling those, if it takes one person a day at a time, to help them realize that that's not what this case was about. Then that's what I'll do.
Let's bring in Chris Cuomo now from New York. Chris, some viewers are writing to me, tweeting me. Why did you choose to sit down and interview George Zimmerman?
Well, I think you have to look at what the point of the interview is. I mean, the idea of you should not give him a platform, he should not be interviewed. I mean, Carol, you tell me if you think I'm wrong, but it's a no-brainer decision that George Zimmerman is newsworthy. He's at the center of a major criminal trial. The idea that you would avoid him because he's unpopular, because people don't like what he did, is not how journalism works. I mean, we all understand that, right?
Absolutely. I'm into full transparency. I was interested in what he had to say, and it appears to me, you know, from these allegations of domestic violence and some of the traffic trouble he's gotten into, his life is clearly unsettled. Some might say it's a mess.
Yeah, I think it's a safe assumption. I don't know that he would disagree. I think that he feels like he has somewhat of a non-life right now. But the question then becomes not whether or not a journalist interviews George Zimmerman. I really believe there is no real question there. It's what do you do with the interview? And my feeling is this. This man's been given a lot of power by people, especially his detractors, strangely enough, that he's a calculating guy who worked the system, who knew he could get away with this. I believe he's something decidedly less than that. And because of that, I think he's a very good example of what we have to be careful about in society. A guy who's relatively unsophisticated, who made a series of bad choices and then found himself killing somebody else. And the law, because of the way it's designed, wound up allowing him to get away with it. And it caused huge problems that we're seeing in the cry to not have him get any more attention. But we have to pay attention to him and to the situation surrounding him so we can use it as an example for change. Now, that said, Carol, I must say, I don't know if in any state they would have convicted George Zimmerman because of how acute the circumstances were of the violent conflict that he wound up in with Trayvon Martin, no matter how many bad decisions by George Zimmerman led him to that point, even where you have a responsibility to retreat, like in New York State and many states under self-defense laws. I still think it would have been a very difficult prosecution for him. But again, the point's now larger. You interview him because he's relevant. He's newsworthy. He just is.
Right.
But what you do with him and the questions that arise out of it, I think those are important choices, and I think it's a very important discussion.
Well, he is relevant in light of the Dunn case and the Stand Your Ground case, which I'm going to talk about right now. Thank you very much, Chris Cuomo. The Dunn verdict.
Dunn, if you had the chance to interview Michael Dunn, I'm sure you'd take it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Chris Cuomo.